Let's just talk about when we are training in a reinforcement-based program, meaning you've decided you want to train your dog without the use of physical corrections or verbal intimidation. You don't want to say, hey, no, You don't want to give them a collar pop. When you decide to train that way, then your number one tool is reinforcement. And so you've got to become brilliant at the use of and the understanding of reinforcement. What do you need to know? First of all, you have to know what are your dog's best reinforcements. That is, number one, what is like off the charts, crazy, outrageous, oh my gosh, I'm losing my mind because this reinforcement is coming out. You also need to know what is a really good reinforcement. And then you've got to know what is an acceptable reinforcement. Now, those things are going to change based on the age of the dog's experience in training and the location where you're training. So what's outrageous, what's good, what's acceptable in this environment at this stage of your training. All right. And what about under these distractions? Because if there's a lot of environmental distractions, you're going to have to go even higher. So what was previously acceptable won't be acceptable when there's a lot of distractions around. Every time you train your dog, you have to consider where you're training and what is outrageous, what is good, what is acceptable, because those are going to keep changing. You also have to know, what are you limited by the environment you're training? So for example, if you're training in a class, you can't use a squeaky toy because you're going to be just distracting all of the other dogs. Likewise, if your dog's outrageous number one reinforcement is swimming and there's no body of water nearby, that can't be your dog's number one outrageous, outstanding reinforcement when you're training in this environment. So the environment, it's not just the distractions, it's the structure of the environment. What problems or what assets does it present that you can use as a reinforcement? Now, the other thing you need to consider, what is the most outrageous, good, and acceptable reinforcement for the behavior that you are training. So if you were going to be training, let's say, precision heel position, you may choose to use something that can be delivered to the mouth of the dog in that precision heel position. So you could use like go for a swim to reinforce that, but it would be more limiting because it could only happen once in a while, where delivering high-value food could happen more quickly. So what is the behavior, and is it reasonable to consider using what the dog loves most of all in a normal situation? All right? Does it work for the behavior that you are training? The next consideration is the delivery of that reinforcement, and that is really dependent upon your goal. What is your goal of training? So if I was wanting to shape my dog to accept their nails being trimmed, there's a lot of things that come up to this, but the position would be they're lying on their side. And I would either give them a marker word, which meant you could get out of that position, or more likely what I would do is bring the reinforcement to them. So the placement of the reinforcement actually reinforces them lying down, because this is a gem and there's going to be a lot of aha moments or knowledge nuggets or gems in this podcast. My mentor, Bob Bailey, always says reinforcement is a process. It's not a moment in time. So you can say, well, it doesn't matter. I can get my dog up and feed them and then they can go back down because I'm using a marker. The marker isolates the response that the dog is doing at that moment. The reinforcement that the animal gets later for that behavior, like when you let them get up, reinforces everything that happens between the marker and them actually getting the cookie. There's a gap in there, right? So the reinforcement process, it reinforces all of that. Do you want a large gap or do you care? The larger the gap, the slower the learning.
The click should not end your dog's behavior. Did you see that? Autographed by Bob Bailey. How cool is that? Stick with me on this. For the next 2 minutes, I'd like to be your dog training coach. If you're brand new to dog training, I know you're going to learn something. And if you've been around the block a few times, I'm pretty confident you still might get some different insight from a sports trainer's viewpoint into your dog training. Okay, let's just say you are a trainer who wants to train this dog to put these front paws onto this rock. That's your assignment. As a dog trainer, you're ready. You've got your clicker duct tape backwards to your hand. You've got your bait pouch filled with handy dandy tasty treats. Your hair's tied back so it won't get in your eyes when you're training. Let's go. Okay, the moment is upon us. The dog hits his front paws to the rock. The trainer clicks her clicker, marking that moment for the dog. Having heard the clicker, the dog then goes in front of the trainer, bouncing up and down, ready for his treat, maybe even helping the trainer by digging his way into the bait bag. The trainer, oblivious to the dog's effort, reaches into her bait bag, gets a treat, and rewards the dog for a job well done. You may be saying, well, Susan, what's wrong with any of that? That looked like a fantastic training session. Well, here's the thing. Reinforcement is a process. It is not an isolated moment in time. So sure, the clicker isolated the moment the dog's paws hit the rock and told the dog, this is what I'm looking for. Do more of this, and you can earn reinforcement. Now, knowing that reinforcement is a process, let's look at the process. Sure, the clicker told the dog, I like when you put your paws on that rock. However, the cookie is the reinforcement the dog ultimately wanted, and the cookie reinforces all of those behaviors that happen after the click.
Because the more rapid the reinforcement, the more reinforcement for a behavior that the animal's getting. Makes sense, right? Reinforcement is a process. If you use a marker, you still need to be considerate of the placement of the reinforcement. So if you wanted to teach a dog to run far away from you and you marked, that's good, and then they came back and sat in front of you while you dug a cookie out of your pocket, yeah, you would be reinforcing them leaving you, but you would also be reinforcing them for coming back and sitting in front of you, which would be in opposition to them running away from you. So the behavior of running away from you would take a lot longer for you to train. Super important. The placement of reinforcement is critical because you've got that gap. Next is the delivery of reinforcement. Well, what's the difference, Susan? The delivery and the placement? The placement is what the dog is doing. The delivery is how swift and deliberate you are when you are bringing that reinforcement to them. So early on in training, I may want to reinforce a dog for holding a sit like super fast, right? Boom, 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 boom. But as the puppy understands that the idea is hold position until you hear a release word, I may say cookie and hold up the cookie just for a moment before I deliver it to them. Do they start paddling their paws? Well, if they do, I'm not going to say cookie for the next one. I'm just going to hold it up and do some it's your choice before I deliver the cookie. All right? So the delivery and the placement are different. The delivery is how quickly you're getting it to the dog, how long and big you grow that reinforcement process gap, and the placement is how much value are you bringing to the behavior that the dog is doing. Okay, reinforcement process, it's a process. So the human's got to be concerned with the value, the delivery, and the placement. The dog, they've got it kind of easy.